Hello chess friends and welcome to your out of chess channel and welcome to the round 8 of the Norway chess tournament in 2022. We're following now a very important game from this round. It's now Magnus Carlsen versus Vachier-lagrave, and this is now an important, really important stage of this super event as Vachier lost his game today against Vachier-lagrave. It's now a big opportunity for Magnus Carlsen to take a decisive lead. We're now in the Armageddon game, which meant now of course that Magnus had 10 minutes on the clock, Maxime had only 7 minutes on the clock, but of course Magnus needs now to win the game in order to get some points. So let's see now what happened. It was a brilliant and sharp attacking gameplay by both sides. It was, I think, one of the best games from this super event. So let's see now what happened. D4 was played by Magnus, knight to f6 by Maxime. We have c4, we have g6, knight to c3, and after move d5 we have now the Grunfeld defense. We have c takes d5, the exchange variation, and after move e4, knight to c3, b takes c3. And okay, many times this position has been played in chess history. The idea is clear. White has a dominant central control with his pawns, but of course black will eventually try with bishop to g7, c5, will try to break these pawns and then continue the pressure, even with knight to c6, even with bishop to g4, for instance, if the knight protects the d4 pawn. So many times the Grunfeld defense in the beginning is a simple battle for the d4 square. Bishop to g7, bishop to b5, c6, bishop to a4, and now you see here Maxime Vachier-lagrave expands on the queenside place. Also here an interesting move, a5 is saying, okay, you got out with your bishop, but now I will use here the pawn storm in order to create some spaces here on the queen side. So we have knight to f3, kingside castling, and now kingside castling also by Magnus. A4 kicking away the bishop, bishop to c2, and now c5 immediately here by Maxime. And okay, this move is perfectly fine because of course you don't want to take, you lose simply the pawn on c3, and then white has problems because b4 will happen in the near future. So it's something that white many times wants to avoid. So that's why rook to b1. Here a beautiful counter attack by Magnus Carlsen against his pawn on b5, and now knight to c6. You cannot take immediately the pawn on b5 because, as we said, here you lose simply the battle around the square. d4, c takes d4. Look at this. This pawn is attacked 3 times. By the queen, by the knight, by the pawn, by the bishop. So it's now a much better position for black. So that's why here Magnus played e5, and this move e5 is a very aggressive approach. In the near future, what you can do is to play something like rook to e1. You can also play knight to g5, and you can maybe break through with the move e6. I think this would be a beautiful tactical idea. So Magnus is saying, I will try this kind of an idea, but the problem is now you have built sort of a dark square pawn chain, and many times when you build pawn chains like this, then one of these pieces is not so good. So many times now the dark square problem has problem to get into the games. So okay, you have your spaces, but it's now of course a problem for the dark square bishop. So you can also play here the move d5, but I think this line is okay. It is playable maybe for both sides, but look at this, knight to e5, again knight to e5, bishop to e5. Still you don't have time here to take out the pawn. Again the c3 is a problem. So this will be, I think, again an equal game for both sides. So Magnus spices it up, I think, here with the move e5, is saying I will go now for a win. I will try now to get something out of my space advantage. So we have here rook to b8, bishop to e4, and now a beautiful counter attack here by Maxime. He's trading off the light for bishops. And it seemed to me in the beginning that this could be maybe an inaccuracy, but actually this was perfectly fine because after you take bishop to f5, g takes f5, we have reached now a position where the only good pieces, I think, here for white are the knight and also the rook. The dark square bishop, as we said, is a little bit paralyzed by its own pawn structure. So with the trades of light square bishop, I think here Maxime Vachier-lagrave has secured a position where he has a better bishop on the board. So this is now, I think, a beautiful strategical idea, although you have weakened a little bit your pawn structure in front of the king, but as I said, when we watch now only the bishops on the board, this could be slightly better for black. But okay, this is still playable for both sides. Look at this, Magnus has this beautiful space advantage, and Magnus is saying I will attack now your weakness. He plays now queen to d3 immediately. We have now queen to d7, and now we have here rook to d1 by Magnus Carlsen in the continuation of the game. The problem is now, of course, you cannot take out this one. You cannot take out the pawn on b5 because you get rook to knight to knight to e5. You attack the queen, or you can also try here knight to b4, cutting off here the connection. You attack, discover attack, and now you lose the rook on b5. So this was now a beautiful tactical shot here that Maxim Vachier-lagrave prepared against Magnus. So we have rook to d1. Magnus is preparing now very important idea. He's trying now to play bishop to f4, and then he's trying to move the pawn to d5. If he manages to do this, d5 and e5 control, then I think black is getting destroyed for sure. So that's why Maxim had to counterplay against these ideas. He played now rook to d8. We have bishop to f4, and now c takes d4, c takes d4, and now e6. You have to stop this potential d5 move by white. So that's why e6 also very important move. But the downside about this move, e6, is of course that you're weakening a little bit further your dark squares. The cool part again also about this structure is for black that black is now a beautiful attack against the pawn on d4. There are now some backward pawn problems here for white, but also we can say here that maybe black can also create the pass pawn here on the b file, maybe, or on the a file. Black will probably use now the pawn majority attack here on the queen side, and will try to simply push this pawn further. Again, this idea rook to b5, I hope you realize it's not working, because again you get knight to b4 attacking the queen, and again the rook is hanging. So here in the continuation we have bishop to g5. So Magnus is now sneaking in with the bishop. He's saying you weakened your pawn structure now I'm going to get my bishops into the game, and he's trying now to get the queen maybe even here to g5, maybe eventually trying some checkmate threats here around the square g7. So we have rook to c8, we have queen to e3, knight to e7. Maxim realized that he could have some problems on the g file, so that's why he's maneuvering the knight here on g6. But also d5 square is very interesting, so this blockade idea against the backward pawn is also perfectly fine. So here black is at least I think an equal position. I even would love to play now even this position more from black perspective, especially because of the structural weaknesses backward pawn, but also because of the possibility to create some kind of an attack here on the queen side. So we have bishop to f6. So Magnus is trying now to make his goal, queen to g5. So we have h6. Here Maxim prevents this idea. We have queen to f4, and now knight to g6, queen to g3. Now Magnus is trying to play some ideas of h4, h5. This is very interesting, to maybe deflect the knight now from the g file, and then to create again some madness here on the g file with this attack by the bishop, but also by the queen. So we have king to h7, and now d5, and this was maybe a slightly inaccuracy by Magnus. I think he has to make this plan. h4, we have to always say this is really fast time format chess. You cannot really see everything in the game. It's really wild, but I think this is perfectly fine. h4, look at this. For instance, black needs now to play the move rook to g8 in order to control further the g file, and now you have to step back, I think, and still I think this is working. So this is, in my opinion, a slightly more playable position for white. But Magnus played a risky choice. He played d5 immediately. What Magnus actually realized, and this is of course much more beautiful what Magnus saw, but actually it's not so accurate. That's the problem. I think what Magnus saw actually is now this attack by the queen against the rook. You see now how Magnus will make this happen. So he's trying now to play some e6 ideas and then discover the attack against this rook. This is really wild what Magnus is doing here. Although, as I said, maybe h4 was a more accurate idea when it comes to computer relations, but of course we should not always watch the game like this. We should always also watch some beautiful human ideas. So as I said, I'm watching the game at home, and I have of course my computer relations. That's not the point, but here Magnus played really a beautiful and brilliant idea with the move d5. Look at what happens. So we have now e takes d5, now rook to b4. Magnus is trying now to get more pieces into the game. We have now rook to c4, and look at this now, rook to c4. We have the b takes c4, and now comes this idea e6. Look at this, the rook is hanging. Okay, the problem is, I think that's the problem about this line by Magnus Carlsen. This is really beautiful what he did, but actually after queen to e6, look at this, queen takes b8, and now after bishop to f6, Black gained simply too much material. Okay, you're up the exchange, but of course look at this. Maxime Vachier-lagrave has now two connected pass pawns on the c file and on the d file that are supported by the bishop. And as I said, okay, it was a beautiful shot, it was a beautiful tactic, but now black should be even, I think, slightly better. So in the continuation, we have rook to e1 attacking the queen. We have queen to d5, queen to d7, supporting further the progress here of these two pawns, and now queen to b6. And here the bishop is attacked, so that's why of course we have here king to g7 protecting everything. And now comes already a critical moment of the game. Here Magnus played now the move g3, and this move is not so good because first of all you're weakening simply the pawn structure. What Maxime should have simply done is here to play the move d4. This is perfectly fine, you just push your pawns further because this is simply too slow, this kind of an attack. Magnus was probably scared of this potential knight to f4 move, and as I said, here you have to play, I think, d4, and the evaluation, believe me or not, is already +4 for black, so this should be winning here for black because of this huge blunder by Magnus Carlsen. But unfortunately here in the game, instead of this move d4, Maxime played now the move f4, and this is now simply too slow. Still black is slightly better, but as I said, simply pushing the pawn here, I'm not seeing good ways how white should defend this position anymore. So here queen to c5 played by Magnus, we have f takes g3, h takes g3, and now a new mistake by Maxime that was really unnecessary what he did here. He played now the move knight to f4, and this is not good. What you have to play is simply, again, push the pawn further, c3. You don't have to make anything here. The knight is protecting you, the bishop is protecting you, you just push the pawns further. So I'm not seeing, as I said, good ways how white should defend this position. But after move knight to f4, what Magnus should have done is actually take here, g takes f4, because look at this, if queen to g4 happens, okay, you can take, but now this rook is coming into the game, and there are now serious threats here with the move queen to f8. Probably this game would still end in a draw because white cannot deliver checkmate. White can only play so perpetual check, so this is now a problem. But what Magnus did after move knight to f4, he played now a new blunder, queen to e3, and this was really unnecessary because here after move knight to d3, here Magnus has to step back with rook to b1, queen to e6, and now here Maxime Vachier-lagrave got challenged with this idea, rook to b7. The threat is of course queen takes e6. We have queen takes e3, we have f takes e3, and now we have this move c3. So Magnus equalize the game now because of this idea, f takes e3. At least he's stopping now one of these pawns. That's now the most important thing about this sequence. So the pawns are not pass pawns anymore. Okay, the c pawn is a pass pawn, but now the d pawn is not a pass pawn, as it has to still collide with the e pawn of white. So here after move f takes e3, we have c3 by Maxime Vachier-lagrave. He pushed now finally his pawns, but it was a little bit too slow because Magnus has now of course the opportunity to to get this rook back, and this pawn on c2 is not making progress further. So in the continuation, after rook to c7, we have knight to b4, we have a knight to e1, again stopping this progress with the move c2. We have bishop to e5, rook to c8, and now here beautiful move again by Maxime. He's trying now to take out the knight, and he's trying of course to push this pawn further. So we have king to f1, bishop to e1. What's really unnecessary because here I think you can take this one. You don't have to rush again because now Maxime would create the new passer. And also look at this, we have also passer on the h file, so this rook, although it can control maybe one of these pawns, but the position is, I think, a little bit too stretched all over the board. So this was maybe a slightly better continuation. But okay, here Maxime took bishop to e1, king to e1, knight takes a2, we have king to d1, and now we have here a3, the rook to b8, we have h5, king to c2. So Magnus is now getting with his king closer towards this pawn, which is now very important. We have h4, rook to b1, we have king to f6, king to b3, and now comes really the critical moment of the game. Maybe you can pause the video and try to see now the drawish continuation that Maxime had to play here. It was really wild to see, but it's an endgame stage here. We have to say it, Maxime Vachier-lagrave was slow on the clock. He had around 5 seconds on the clock in this particular position, so it was really hard to see. Okay, The problem is, of course, obviously the knight is trapped, but what you have to do, you have to include now your king into the game. That's now the only way to make a draw here, because okay, you're allowing your opponent here to take out the knight, but at least you are pushing the pawn. Look at this, c2. Now the rook has to play here. We're simply pushing our king towards the king side. Now we play g2. Look at this, you have this one, okay, king to c3, and look at this. Even if the white takes out now the pawn here on h, at least the king is close enough to this pawn, and this should probably be a draw. But after knight to b4 that Maxim Vachier-lagrave played, it's a little bit different story, because after king to b4 the king has to be here already on f5. That's the beauty about endgames. You have to play really actively with your king. So now look at this, Magnus got challenged with the move a2. Okay, we have rook to a1, we have c2, now king to c3. Now again Maxim tried to push the pawns, but look at this, the king was simply one move too far away from the action. That was the difference between this previous endgame and now this one, because look at this, after king to d3 in this position, Maxim Vachier-lagrave actually resigned. So what would happen, of course you can play it like this, but now with king to e2 we're not allowing this pawn to get here, and then with king to f2 we're controlling everything, and this is simply game over. So as I said, you can play king to h3, but now with king to f3 we're not allowing, as I said, this pieces to breathe. In one particular moment the king has to step back here to h4, then we play king to g2 and the game is over. So really beautiful endgame technique by Magnus Carlsen, but this was really an up and down. It was again a roller coaster in the Armageddon game. Really wild things happened, which means now that Magnus has now really a great lead in front of Vachier. He has, I think, to make only 1 point tomorrow, and then he'll be the winner of the super event. So beautiful performance by Magnus Carlsen. Vachier also played a beautiful tournament, so we'll see what will happen tomorrow. It will be again a beautiful and dynamic day. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game. I really enjoyed it a lot. Interesting ideas of the Greenfield defense, but also interesting stuff in the endgame stage, because this is something that you should never forget, that you have to use your king in the end game. So it's, I think, a really beautiful study about potential ideas. So okay, if you want to see more games from this chess event, please also check out my coverage so far. Here are some games that we have covered before, and if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.